I always thought my mornings were peaceful. My house, tucked into a quiet neighborhood, felt like a sanctuary. I'd wake up, pour a cup of coffee, and watch the sunlight hit the trees outside. It was simple. It was mine, and I loved it, but that peace didn't last. One ordinary Thursday, I found a letter slipped under my door. The envelope was official-looking, with the HOA logo stamped in bold on the corner. I tore it open, expecting some harmless newsletter or maybe a reminder about the pool rules. What I got instead made my heart skip a beat. They were complaining about me, about noise, about my coffee grinder. I stared at the words, reading them over and over like maybe I'd misinterpreted. Disturbing the neighborhood, it said. Violating quiet hours. My mind raced. Was this real? Could grinding coffee beans actually be illegal? I laughed, because what else could I do? I laughed until my neighbor peeked over the fence and gave me that look, the one that said, "Are you seriously laughing at that?" It got worse. A few days later, another letter arrived, this one much thicker and scarier. The words "Notice of Legal Action" were splashed across it in red ink. My stomach dropped. I read the fine print. They were threatening fines, escalating quickly if I didn't comply. I sank onto my couch, coffee in hand, but I couldn't drink it. Every sip felt like betrayal. My morning routine, my small joy, was suddenly a crime scene. I kept thinking about the HOA president. She was a legend in our community, not the kind of person you cross lightly. She loved rules the way some people love chocolate. She thrived on authority, on control, and apparently on suing her neighbors over trivial noise. I'd seen her at meetings, sharp suits, sharper words, a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She had her sights on me, and suddenly I was the target of her self-appointed crusade. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe if I apologized, if I promised to grind my beans more quietly, she'd leave me alone. But then another envelope arrived, this one marked urgent. It detailed the specific violations, complete with timestamps and alleged noise levels. I didn't know whether to cry, laugh, or scream. It was absurd, it was terrifying, and it was very, very real. That night I couldn't sleep. Every little sound in my house felt amplified, the hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, even my own breathing. Was it too loud? Was it too early? I tiptoed to the kitchen, making sure not to disturb the imaginary neighbors watching me through the walls. I felt trapped, like my own home had turned into a courtroom. Friends tried to comfort me. "It's ridiculous," they said. "You'll be fine." But I couldn't shake the worry. They didn't understand the subtle terror of knowing someone could literally try to take your life apart over a coffee grinder. And in the back of my mind, a tiny, stubborn voice whispered, "I'm not backing down." Little did I know that decision would set me on a path I never expected. A path that led to a courtroom, a judge, and one simple question that would change everything. But for now, all I had was fear, confusion, and a growing sense that my quiet life had been shattered by an absurd, unstoppable force. I didn't know it yet, but the war was about to begin. The next morning, I woke up to another envelope sitting on my doorstep. My heart sank before I even touched it. The words "Homeowner Association" glared at me like a warning sign. I hesitated, hands trembling, before opening it. Inside was another letter, thicker than the last, and this one came with attachments, alleged noise logs, timestamps, and even diagrams of my kitchen showing where the coffee grinder was placed. I blinked at it, disbelief twisting into anger. Who does this? Who measures the decibel levels of a coffee grinder like it's a jet engine taking off? I felt like I was living in a parallel universe. I reread the letter carefully, hoping to find a loophole, a tiny error that would prove this was a joke. But no, every word was serious, every threat real. They demanded fines, payment deadlines, and a promise to abide by quiet hours. Quiet hours, at 7 in the morning, for grinding coffee beans. My life had officially become a Kafkaesque nightmare. I called my best friend, desperate to share the absurdity. "You're kidding me, right?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Nope," she said deadpan. "This is serious, you have to fight this." I laughed bitterly. Fight? Against an HOA with lawyers, bylaws, and the patience of 1,000 tyrants. But deep down, I knew she was right. If I didn't stand up, they would walk all over me. That evening I saw her, the HOA president, walking past my house as if she owned every square inch of the neighborhood. Sharp suit, heels clicking on the pavement, clipboard in hand. She glanced at me and gave that knowing smirk, the kind that says, "I'm in charge and you're in my crosshairs." I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was petty. It was ridiculous, but I couldn't ignore it. I had to prepare. I started documenting everything, every sound I made, every interaction, every complaint I had ever received. I researched HOA laws online, reading through long paragraphs that made my eyes water. I discovered that HOAs had authority, yes, but there were limits. And suddenly, for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't completely powerless. Still, fear lingered. Every morning, I tiptoed around my own house. The coffee grinder became my enemy and my friend. I experimented with quieter settings, wrapped it in towels, even whispered to it, hoping it would behave. My family couldn't stop laughing at me, and I tried to laugh along. But inside, anxiety gnawed at me. Every knock on the door, every flutter of paper made me flinch. Then the day came. Another letter, this one marked urgent. It wasn't just a warning anymore, it was a court summons. My stomach sank. I had never been in a courtroom in my life. The idea of standing in front of a judge facing the HOA and their lawyer made my hands sweat. I imagined them all, the president with her smug smile, the lawyer with his sharp suit and sharper tongue, and me, alone, nervous, a grinder enthusiast accused of crime. I tried to sleep that night, but I couldn't. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the absurdity in my head. My mind wandered. How did it come to this? I thought back to that quiet morning, to the simple joy of coffee and sunlight, and I felt a deep ache. Something small, something harmless, had been turned into a weapon against me. But as fear bubbled in my chest, another feeling emerged, anger, sharp and steady. I refused to let them win without a fight. I refused to let my life be dictated by someone else's obsession with control. I knew I had to show up, speak up, and prove that common sense mattered. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The next steps would take me into a world of courtrooms, legal jargon, and one unforgettable question from a judge that could change everything. But for now, all I could do was prepare, breathe, and hope that the absurdity of it all would somehow work in my favor. And in the quiet of that night, as the neighborhood slept, I made a promise to myself. No coffee grinder, no alarm clock, and certainly no morning ritual would be silenced by fear. I was ready to fight. I spent the next few days in a haze of stress, research, and late-night strategizing. Every time I brewed my coffee, I couldn't help but think about the letters, the logs, the diagrams, the warnings. It was like the HOA had turned my life into a reality TV show, and I was the unsuspecting star of a nightmare episode. Friends tried to help. "Just apologize," they said. "It'll be fine." But it wasn't fine. Apologizing would be admitting guilt for something that wasn't wrong. I wasn't disturbing anyone. I was living my life. And more than that, I was tired of letting fear dictate my mornings. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the fridge became a potential weapon they could use against me. I even started walking on tiptoes around the house, whispering to my dog not to bark. The absurdity made me laugh nervously, but deep down I felt cornered. I knew I had to prepare. I started documenting everything meticulously. Every time I used my coffee grinder, I wrote down the time, the duration, even the approximate decibel level from my phone app. I photographed my kitchen, marked the placement of appliances, and double-checked my HOA rules. It was tedious, but it gave me a sense of control. If they wanted a war, I was ready. I also started mentally rehearsing. I imagined walking into the courtroom, standing tall, facing the HOA lawyer and their president, who I could already see sharpening her smirk. I rehearsed my words, my tone, even my breathing. I imagined the judge asking questions, the lawyer objecting, the gallery murmuring in disbelief. My heart would race just thinking about it, but each scenario made me stronger. Despite my preparation, fear lingered. I lay awake at night, thinking about every possible outcome. What if the judge sided with them? What if I had to pay fines I couldn't afford? What if this became a permanent mark on my record, something that haunted me every time I brewed my coffee? The anxiety was suffocating, but it also fueled something inside me, determination. I realized that this wasn't just about a coffee grinder anymore. It was about standing up for myself, about refusing to let petty bureaucracy control my life. The HOA was powerful, organized, and relentless, but I had something they didn't: truth and resolve. I reminded myself of that constantly, repeating it like a mantra whenever my fear threatened to take over. Then came the day I finally saw her, the HOA president, again. She was walking past my house, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning like she owned the streets. I felt a surge of anger. I wanted to shout, to tell her that her rules didn't scare me. Instead, I took a deep breath and nodded politely, pretending calm while my mind raced with strategies. Every step she took reminded me that this fight wasn't going to be easy. I also started thinking about the courtroom itself. I'd never been in one before. I didn't know the etiquette, the procedures, the exact words to say. I imagined a cold room, wooden benches, the stern judge peering over a desk, the HOA lawyer ready to pounce on any mistake. My palms would sweat just picturing it. But I couldn't let fear paralyze me. I had to embrace it, use it, turn it into focus. By the end of the week, I felt a mix of exhaustion and readiness. The fear was still there, nagging at the back of my mind, but it had transformed into determination. I was no longer just the homeowner being targeted. I was a fighter, a strategist, someone who refused to be bullied by absurd rules. As I went to bed that night, I whispered to myself, tomorrow I step into a courtroom. Tomorrow I face them all, and tomorrow I won't let them win. And even as I drifted off to sleep, the coffee grinder sat on the counter, silent but waiting, a symbol of everything I was about to fight for. The morning of the court date arrived, and I felt like I hadn't slept in weeks. My stomach was a knot of nerves, my hands clammy, my heart thudding like a drum in my chest. I stared at the mirror, trying to find some calm in my reflection, but all I saw was a mix of fear and determination staring back at me. Today wasn't just a day in court. It was a battle for my mornings, my home, my sanity. As I drove to the courthouse, I tried to imagine the scene. Rows of benches, the smell of polished wood, the murmurs of people waiting for their cases. I pictured the judge, stern and unyielding, peering over the bench, expecting me to stumble over my words. And I pictured her, the HOA president, sitting smugly, ready to assert her authority, her lawyer at her side, pensively flipping through documents like tiny daggers pointed straight at me. The courthouse lobby was buzzing with people, each absorbed in their own battles. Some whispered, some muttered to themselves, some laughed nervously. I clutched my folder tightly, the pages inside full of evidence I had painstakingly collected. Noise logs, photographs, timestamps, and a carefully written account of every step I had taken to follow the rules. It was my shield, my armor, my proof that I wasn't just some noisy menace. When my case was called, I felt my knees weaken. The courtroom seemed enormous, the ceiling high, the walls lined with dark wood that absorbed every sound. The judge's gavel echoed like a cannon, and suddenly I was standing there, facing the HOA president and her lawyer. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing, trying to look confident even though every nerve in my body screamed otherwise. The HOA lawyer rose, tall and smug, and began to outline their case. He spoke with authority, citing bylaws, quiet hours, alleged disturbances. Every word felt like a challenge, a gauntlet thrown at my feet. I could see the president nodding, pleased with herself, convinced she had me cornered. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to focus. I reminded myself I had the truth on my side. I had evidence, I had preparation, I had reason. And then it was my turn. I stepped forward, feeling every eye in the room on me. I opened my folder and spoke slowly, carefully, laying out the facts. I explained my routine, my efforts to minimize sound, my respect for my neighbors. I presented my logs, my diagrams, my photographs, each item a testament to my care and responsibility. I spoke not just to defend myself, but to show the absurdity of their claims without mocking them. Because if there was one thing I had learned, it was that humor could wait. Clarity and calm were my weapons now. The HOA lawyer tried to interrupt, objecting to details, questioning the validity of my evidence. But the judge listened patiently, occasionally raising a hand to silence him. Every objection, every smirk from the HOA president only strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just speaking for myself. I was standing up for common sense, for fairness, for the right to live my life without ridiculous intimidation. As I finished my explanation, I felt a strange shift in the room. The tension, thick and suffocating, seemed to lift slightly. The judge leaned forward, eyes sharp but curious, and spoke a single sentence that sent a chill down my spine. "Can you tell me exactly what the alleged noise was?" The room went silent. Every eye turned to me. I felt my heartbeat echoing in my ears. The HOA president's confident smirk faltered ever so slightly. Her lawyer shuffled papers nervously, and I realized in that moment that this one question could change everything. I took a deep breath. I knew that the next few seconds could define not just the outcome of this case, but my mornings, my freedom, and even my sanity. Every preparation, every late-night anxiety, every whispered conversation with my dog had led to this moment. I opened my mouth, ready to answer, and for the first time in days I felt something rare and wonderful, calm. The courtroom was silent. Every eye was on me, every ear straining for my answer. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if even breathing too loudly could disrupt the moment. The judge's gaze was sharp, unwavering, and filled with that rare mix of patience and authority that made every word spoken in that room carry weight. "Can you tell me exactly what the alleged noise was?" the judge asked again, slow and deliberate. The simplicity of the question caught me off guard. After all the letters, the logs, the threats, the fine print of bylaws and quiet hours, it all boiled down to this single, almost human question. My mind raced. How do I explain this? How do I capture the absurdity without sounding ridiculous myself? The HOA lawyer shifted in his seat, smirking at first, clearly expecting me to stumble. The HOA president leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. She believed she had me trapped, ready to humiliate me for daring to challenge her authority. But in that moment, I realized something powerful. The truth doesn't panic, it doesn't stumble, and it doesn't hide. I took a deep breath, feeling the calm settle over me like a shield. I looked at the judge and said, "It was my coffee grinder." A pause, longer than I expected. The judge blinked once, then twice, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of his lips. The courtroom remained still, hanging on every second, as if time itself had slowed. The HOA lawyer's smirk faltered, his confidence visibly cracking. The president's eyes widened, the carefully constructed aura of power beginning to crumble. I continued, my voice steady now. "Every morning around 7, I grind coffee beans for my family. I've never played music, never yelled, never done anything beyond the normal sounds of living in a home. And yet somehow, this small, ordinary act became the focus of a complaint." The judge leaned back slightly, fingers steepled, listening with an intensity that made my heart pound. I realized in that moment that this was bigger than a coffee grinder. It was about standing up for yourself, about refusing to be bullied by rules that made no sense. My hands had stopped shaking, my voice had found strength I didn't know I had, and the weight of fear began to lift. The HOA lawyer tried to interject, "Your Honor, if I may," but the judge raised a hand, silencing him instantly. That single gesture was electric. It was a clear message. Reason matters, and frivolous intimidation does not win here. The president shifted in her seat, eyes darting nervously to her lawyer. I could almost see the panic rising. The foundation of her confident assault on my life was crumbling, brick by brick, under the simplest truth. I felt a rush of vindication. Weeks of stress, sleepless nights, whispered conversations with my dog, endless research, and meticulous documentation, all of it had led to this moment. And now the absurdity of it all was plain for everyone to see. I wasn't exaggerating. I wasn't careless. I was living my life, and the law had to acknowledge that. The judge leaned forward again, voice calm but firm. "Thank you, that will be all for now." The courtroom remained tense, waiting for the final word, but in that moment I knew that the balance had shifted. The power which had been held so arrogantly by the HOA was no longer theirs to wield unchallenged. I sank slightly in relief, not fully realizing it until the next moment. The tension that had gripped me for weeks, the fear that had turned my home into a battlefield, began to melt away. Every neighbor who had doubted me, every sleepless night, every moment of panic, it had all led to this. The truth was simple, the noise was innocent, and the court had listened. As I glanced toward the gallery, I caught a few familiar faces. Friends, neighbors, some quietly smiling, others wide-eyed, as if they couldn't believe what had just unfolded. And I realized something profound. Sometimes the simplest truth is the strongest weapon. The next moments would bring closure, vindication, and laughter at the absurdity of the situation. But for now, all I could do was breathe, feeling the weight of fear lift from my shoulders, replaced by the quiet, satisfying power of standing up and being heard. The courtroom was silent, every ear straining for the judge's words. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest like a drum, each beat echoing in my ears. The tension was unbearable, as if the air itself had thickened and trapped us all in a moment, suspended between fear and relief. I gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, trying to steady my trembling hands. The judge leaned back slightly, fingers steepled, and regarded us with calm authority. The HOA president sat upright, confident, or at least pretending to be, and her lawyer fidgeted with papers, clearly trying to piece together a way to recover from the courtroom blow dealt by my simple, honest answer. Finally, the judge spoke. His voice was deliberate, slow, carrying a weight that made every word matter. After reviewing the evidence and hearing the testimony, he began, pausing just long enough to make every heartbeat feel louder. It's clear that the alleged noise does not constitute a violation of the HOA regulations. I blinked, then blinked again. The words didn't fully register at first. Did he just say what I thought he said? The judge continued. The case is dismissed. The fines and legal threats are null and void. The homeowner may continue their normal activities without restriction, provided they comply with standard laws regarding noise and conduct. A wave of relief hit me like a tidal wave. My shoulders slumped, and I felt a rush of laughter bubble up uncontrollably. The absurdity, the tension, the weeks of anxiety, it all collided in that moment. I had won. Against all odds, against petty intimidation, against an HOA that thought a coffee grinder could ruin lives. I laughed so hard I almost cried, and I swear I saw the HOA president's face pale just a little. Her lawyer looked like he had just been told the sky was falling. He shuffled papers frantically, muttering under his breath, but there was no revering this. The judgment was final and the truth had won. I glanced around the courtroom and caught a few familiar faces in the gallery. My friends were trying to hide their smiles, neighbors were nodding subtly, and I could see the surprise in the eyes of strangers who had been watching this unfold. I felt a sense of vindication that went beyond the legal victory. It was personal, emotional, and deeply satisfying. I had been cornered, belittled, and threatened, and yet here I stood victorious. As I gathered my papers to leave, I caught the HOA president's gaze. Her confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a mask of frustration and disbelief. I wanted to say something witty, something that would encapsulate the absurdity of the entire ordeal, but I resisted. Victory didn't need words, it needed presence. I let my smile say it all. I had endured, I had prepared, and I had won. Walking out of the courthouse felt surreal. The sun was shining, the streets were calm, and yet for the first time in weeks I felt truly free. The burden that had weighed on me, fear, anxiety, absurdity, was gone. I could breathe again. I could laugh again. I could grind my coffee without guilt or worry. And yet a small part of me couldn't help but chuckle at the sheer ridiculousness of it all. Weeks of sleepless nights, anxiety, whispered conversations with my dog, and meticulous logging of coffee grinder decibels, all for this moment. And here it was, a simple, undeniable victory rooted in truth, preparation, and a little bit of stubbornness. As I stepped into the sunlight, I felt a surge of empowerment. I had faced a bureaucratic giant and come out unscathed. I had learned something invaluable. Courage isn't just about bravery in the face of danger. Sometimes it's about standing up for yourself when the world tries to impose nonsense on your life. That day, as I returned home, I brewed my coffee like a victorious warrior raising a flag after a long battle. Every sound, the grinder, the hum of the kettle, the clink of the spoon, felt like a triumphant note in a symphony of personal freedom. And I knew deep down that this absurd, unforgettable experience had changed me forever. I wasn't just a homeowner. I was a survivor of the most ridiculous, bureaucratic challenge my quiet mornings could ever face. The courthouse doors swung shut behind me, and for a moment I just stood there, blinking in the sunlight, letting the reality sink in. I had won. I really had. The case was dismissed, the fines erased, the threats nullified. My coffee grinder had survived, and so had I, but the world outside the courthouse wasn't the same quiet neighborhood I had left behind weeks ago. It was a battlefield of gossip, curiosity, and judgment. As I walked back to my car, I noticed neighbors peeking from behind curtains and across fences, their eyes wide with disbelief. Some waved awkwardly, unsure whether to congratulate me or just pretend none of this ever happened. Others whispered to each other, glances darting in my direction, as if I were some kind of celebrity who had just survived an epic showdown. I couldn't help but smile. The absurdity of the situation had made me infamous in my own little corner of the world. Driving home, I replayed the courtroom in my mind. The judge's single question, the HOA president's faltering smirk, the lawyer's frantic paper shuffling, it all felt surreal. I laughed aloud at the thought of weeks of anxiety and sleepless nights all over a coffee grinder. And yet beneath the humor there was a deeper satisfaction. I had stood my ground. I had refused to be bullied by ridiculous rules, and I had emerged victorious. When I pulled into my driveway, I was greeted by a few familiar faces. Friends who had been quietly rooting for me, neighbors who had wanted to see justice done, and even the dog, who seemed to understand that something significant had happened. I waved, trying to look calm, though inside my heart was still racing. The freedom I felt wasn't just about the court ruling. It was about reclaiming control over my own life. Inside my house, I brewed a cup of coffee with a sense of ceremony. The grinder whirred and hummed as it always had, and I let the sound wash over me, a sweet victory that only I could fully appreciate. I took a sip, savoring the warmth and the aroma, and allowed myself to laugh at the absurdity of it all. I had spent weeks tiptoeing around my own home, whispering to appliances and dogs alike, and now, finally, I could live freely again. The HOA didn't disappear completely, of course. I could still feel the lingering tension in the neighborhood. I saw them at meetings, whispering, glancing my way, but there was a subtle shift. The aura of untouchable authority had faded. The president's smirk was tighter, her steps measured, and even her lawyer seemed more cautious around me. The power dynamics had changed, and that in itself was satisfying. I realized something else too. Humor had been my secret weapon. Laughing at the absurdity didn't diminish the seriousness of the situation. It gave me strength. It reminded me that fear can be managed, stress can be endured, and ridiculous challenges can be faced with courage. I had learned that standing up for yourself doesn't always require shouting or anger. Sometimes it's about calm persistence, clarity, and a little bit of wit. That evening, as I sat on my porch, the neighborhood quiet once more, I thought about the weeks I had spent preparing, worrying, and strategizing. It had been exhausting, emotional, and yes, often humiliating. But it had also been empowering. I had discovered a resilience in myself I hadn't known existed. I had learned that even in the face of petty authority, absurd rules, and intimidation, there is always a way to assert your rights without losing your mind or your humor. And as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I knew this was more than just a personal victory. It was a lesson for anyone who has ever felt powerless in their own home, a reminder that courage can come in small, everyday packages, like standing up for your morning coffee. I poured another cup, smiled at the hum of the grinder, and whispered to myself, "This is mine. Every single morning, this is mine." Days passed, and life in the neighborhood slowly returned to its familiar rhythm. The sun rose, the birds sang, and my coffee grinder hummed proudly in the kitchen. I no longer tiptoed around the house, no longer whispered to my dog, no longer feared the absurd wrath of the HOA. I had won, but more importantly, I had grown. Friends stopped by, eager to hear every detail about the courtroom showdown. We laughed over cups of coffee, recounting the absurdity of it all. "Can you believe they actually tried to sue you over a coffee grinder?" one friend asked, shaking her head. I laughed, realizing that, yes, the situation had been ridiculous, but it had also taught me something invaluable about resilience, courage, and standing up for what's right. Even the neighbors who had been quiet observers seemed to treat me differently now. There was a subtle nod of respect in their eyes, a recognition that I hadn't just survived bureaucracy. I had navigated it with clarity, composure, and a sense of humor. The HOA president was still around, but her aura of invincibility had cracked. The power she wielded so arrogantly had proven fragile in the face of truth. I took some time to reflect on the journey. Weeks ago, I had been anxious, fearful, and uncertain. The letters, fines, and threats had felt like an insurmountable mountain, but standing my ground had shown me that even the most ridiculous obstacles can be overcome with preparation, honesty, and persistence. Courage, I realized, isn't about fearlessness. It's about moving forward despite fear. And humor had been my secret ally. Every whispered joke with friends, every absurd thought about tiptoeing around my own home, every internal monologue about coffee grinders being weapons of mass disruption. It all helped me stay sane. Laughter wasn't just relief, it was a shield, a tool to face the absurdity of life with grace. That night I brewed a special cup of coffee and sat on my porch, the warm light of the kitchen spilling behind me. I watched the neighborhood settle into evening calm, the familiar sounds of life. A dog barking, a lawnmower in the distance, a neighbor's door closing, no longer felt like threats but reminders that normal life was resilient. I smiled, thinking of the weeks of stress, the letters, the logs, the courtroom, and finally the victory. I realized the story wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who has ever felt powerless against rules, authority, or bureaucracy. It was about the small ways people try to assert control over others' lives and the courage it takes to stand up to them. Most importantly, it was about finding your voice when the world tries to silence it, even if the weapon is as mundane as a coffee grinder. And yes, there was a little humor in it too. I couldn't resist imagining the HOA president explaining to her friends how she lost a case over morning coffee. The image made me chuckle, a private little victory that no court ruling could fully capture. Sometimes, winning isn't just about legality, it's about reclaiming your dignity, your routine, and your sanity. Looking back now, I understand why I refused to back down. The fear, the anxiety, the sleepless nights, they were all part of the journey. They tested my resolve, sharpened my mind, and ultimately made the victory even sweeter. And as I sipped my coffee, savoring each sound of the grinder, each tiny clink and hum, I felt a quiet pride. I had defended my home, my mornings, and my right to live freely without guilt or intimidation. So to anyone who has ever felt powerless or overwhelmed, take heart. The simplest truths, the quiet courage, and even a little humor can carry you through the most absurd battles. And as for me, I'll keep grinding my coffee, laughing quietly at the memory of it all, and enjoying the sweet, triumphant taste of freedom, one morning at a time. Because in the end, the HOA may try, but they will never take away your life, your laughter, or your coffee. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one, the truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.